Yeah, Papa Mutwena. Or the eye is still trying to connect the microphone. Yes, I, Papa Mutwena, can the eye hear Ayman?
Yes, Ayman can hear the eye. Give thanks.
Yes, I did the ancient have anything to reflect on the screen?
No, ancient. I mean, my apologies because Ayman, I'm just using my phone for now.
All right.
I don't have a proper machine. True.
All right, ancient. So maybe perhaps, and I can just wait maybe a little, a minute or two, maybe just to check if the INI may also log in, maybe after the 2 minutes, then INI we can see if INI can proceed.
True.
Yes, sir, ancient. Yeah, otherwise, the proceedings are recorded, and if maybe the eyes happen to log in a little later, they may still get access to the content still.
Oh, true. Also, the eye was perhaps suggesting that I and I we proceed.
Yeah, well, because basically we are running on a schedule. We could try to balance.
Yes,
No.
True.
Yeah, insurance.
Yes, I.
Well, in any case, yeah, I think ancient we could proceed like that, and then as even the item log in, Aman will admit them as it were, but I think since Aman is the program director, I should also maybe introduce the I, as the I would be also deliberating on an item on the program. So yes, Ancient. So in this moment, I would like Aman S. Ras Chulompolo, the Secretary General of New Race Consciousness, at this moment introduce the program as New Race Consciousness has planned and scheduled it, the lecture on the coronation of Emperor Haile Selassie I and Empress Waizero Mene on the 2nd of November 1930 in Ethiopia, in Addis Ababa. So and I have a program for this particular event, and I have a panel of speakers on the program, and I have the question and answer period, wherein Anna will be deliberating with the speakers. And to introduce the organization, New Race Consciousness, I have Ras Mutweni, who is the spokesperson of New Race Consciousness. He's the member of the Black Lion Club. The Black Lion Club is the executive body of the New Race Consciousness. Papa Mutwena holds a BCom degree from UNISA, He is a member spokesperson of New Race Consciousness. Yes, I. So greetings, Papa Motuena. Give thanks.
Yes, Papa Tulo, I man give thanks even for the introduction, Ancient. I am truly humbled even to be amongst the ites, even to proceed with the works that I and I started. When we registered the organization, and Ayman was checking one document there, that was the acknowledgement of the application for the registration in terms of the Non-Profit Act. This document we received on the 23rd of the 5th month in 2007. So that is when we initiated initially the works of New Race Consciousness in order for the organization to be in existence. Yes, in terms of the organization and the works that the organization seeks to fulfill is through Ayman will just share in terms of what we have on the constitution to the ites, you know, how even about we came about the name and the description of the consciousness and the works that the consciousness will be doing going forward. So in terms of the name of the consciousness, we said that the name of the consciousness will be New Race Consciousness, and its shortened name will be NRC. So the name of the consciousness was taken from the teachings of His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, conquering Lion of the tribe of Judah, elect of himself, light of the world, its rightful ruler, Prince of Peace, international ruler of morality, defender of the faith, Jah Rastafari. During an appeal to the United Nations on 6th October of 1963 that we must become members of a new race. This and then the consciousness's motto shall be known as educating the illiterate millions, and the consciousness will further identify itself with all other organizations with similar aims and vision with regards to the teachings of the Father Haile Selassie and Mother Empress Menen I. And then the second article on the Constitution that describes the consciousness, 2.1. The consciousness will be a non-profit making organization. 2.2. The consciousness is to make the teachings of Haile Selassie and Empress Menen I its own consciousness and cornerstone. And then 2.3, the consciousness is to seek closer working relations with all other institutions and organizations that are working toward same aim and vision. 2.4, to strengthen its work, it will seek to assist the Ethiopian Royal House of Solomonic Dynasty, African Union, United Nations organizations, and other organizations in their efforts for consolidation and eternal preservation of world peace. The consciousness is for all humanity without regard to race, creed, or religion, as envisioned by the Father Emperor Haile Selassie. The consciousness is to adhere to all principles and charters of the African Union and of the United Nations Organization's Charter on Human Rights. Those are the two articles. And then Ayman will just skip the body and powers of the consciousness and move to the aims and visions of the organization, as to be clear in terms of what the organization seeks to achieve. So it's the fourth article on the Constitution, and The eye is having some difficulties in terms of hearing. But Ayman will continue then. So for the aims and visions 4.1, it says that the consciousness will promote and make known all the teachings of His Imperial Majesty, Emperor Haile Selassie, and Her Imperial Majesty Empress Y0 Men and I to the whole world community as a tool for perfecting world affairs. 4.2, the consciousness will promote the culture of learning and teaching in and around the world with special emphasis on ancient African history. 4.3, the consciousness aims to establish educational community research centers and community schools on African thought as a solution in the promotion of African heritage, spirituality, culturally, economically, and socially. 4.4, the consciousness will fight diseases such as poverty and ignorance by running companies and nationally and internationally. 4.5, the consciousness will not be fully active in political matters, but will act as an advisory body through its own agency or departments, exploiting the paths open for civil society by relevant intergovernmental organizations and departments. 4.6, the consciousness will make promotion of good governance its immediate concern in social, economic, and cultural spheres. That is the promotion of international morality and collective security toward preservation of world peace. And then 4.7, the consciousness shall not fail to involve itself in every humanitarian work and offer its unbound support to charity organizations run by private or governmental institutions. Give thanks. So that is in terms of the constitution, how we had envisioned the organization and the works that the organization would like to fulfill. I don't know, perhaps if the IETS, there was something in terms of the nature of the organization that I had left out. Oh, give thanks. Then Ayman will then proceed. So in terms of the organization's existence since 2007, throughout the years, because I remember that was the last year that I had left the Free State, and most of us were never together again from the university in Vista, the Velcom campus, the formerly known as Vista, which is now the CUT campus. So it was in 2007 that the organization was set up, and then from 2008 I started to come and live this side of Johannesburg. So the other brothers that we had initially initiated the organization was Papa Tabo. I know Papa Nation was also one of the members who was the founding member of the organization, as well as Papa Muabi and Papa Tulo and Ayman. And I think there was also Papa Lucas and Papa Mahapi, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of the signatures that we sent forward initially to initiate the organization. So for some years, due to some challenges that I had. Okay.
And the idea, Ayman.
Oh, give thanks, Ancient. I am still on time in terms.
Yeah, greetings, Ancients.
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
Yeah, Papa Marvin. Yes, sir, we can hear you, man.
Oh, give thanks, I. Then Iman was still forward. Then.
Yes, I, Papa Mutwena, the eye can forward. If the eye.
Yes, I.
Yes, I give that.
Oh, true, but it was. Yes, I. I. Marvin.
Yes, I think maybe I can try to come close to the mic and raise the voice. Maybe the I then struggle to hear Papa Mutwena there.
Oh, my apologies, I Ancient. I hope that is much better, the King.
Yeah, much better.
Nna ke a utlwa King yaka mare ho na le mo o khathileng teng.
Alright, hobane ke dipula tse heavy ka mona my lord, o ska ne ke hlalosetsa ntate two.
Oh, I re King yaka.
Rastafari. Mare ka re ya saka to the powers.
Give thanks, my king. Yes, I. So even.
Next reasoning ever since. Ne ke kopa mogolo ang update.
Yes, I.
Ne ke re mogolo ka go pula sale ena ha ke utlwa letho. Ne ke kopa mogolo update mohlomong ha be ke missitse something ebo.
Yes, we were just putting forward in terms of the introduction of the organization. So I was just reading through the constitution of New Race Consciousness, you know, the name, the nature of the business, the nature of the organization as well, and then the aims and visions as well. It's on share in the reasoning, Iman. Yes, I. So, the other things that we had mentioned was the initial year that the organization was established, which was in 2007. So, the fact that at some point in time, re stop the works of the organization. Re citile a few of the challenges tse ne di le teng of the initial members. But through all those years, even involved in its own activities, register with the CRL, the Commission ya Religious and Linguistic Communities as well. So the organization, I'm not quite certain how long, but we have been to 2 consultative conferences with the CRL, and I'm still holding one certificate which says that the New Race Consciousness is a community council member with the CRL, which is valid for 5 years, and it was issued in 2018 in the previous consultative conference, of which the ICE had requested that Ayman be the one to attend due to the proximity, as that Ayman was closer still. And in terms of just coming forward after I don't know if perhaps there's anything else in terms of the introduction for the organization. If the eyes could just assist Ayman, where Ayman might have left any important information out.
Oh, nothing on my part, Ancient. We give thanks. I think the I has given a proper introduction of the organization.
Give thanks, Ancient.
Or I think
Yeah, so in terms of
maybe the I
yes,
just I think maybe the elder just forgot to mention Papa Nation as also one of the signatories of the constitution, the founding member.
true. Yes, Papa Nation Sechabambele, true. He was also one of the members in founding. Yes. Even in terms of I just coming forward and meeting for Vande, it's just the continuation of those works that the organization initiated originally, to say that even the teachings of His Imperial Majesty and Empress Menen, seeing that it's the coming coronation, and it's going to be the 92nd since 1930, if I'm not mistaken. Significance of that day to the Rastafari community and to I as well as members of New Race Consciousness, because we know that the teachings of their majesties are the key to the future, not only of the African continent, but of the whole world. So I might give thanks for everyone who in attendance to continue on these works. Most High bless Rastafari.
Selassie I, Rastafari. Yes, I give thanks, Papa Mutwena, for that wonderful introduction, my Lord of NRC. There's also just one point I would also like to emphasize, from the ICE introduction there. Let me, before doing that, just acknowledge the presence of Ancient Jabulani, who has just joined I. Yes, Ancient, greetings and blessed love, Rastafari.
Rastafari, greetings. Yes, I give thanks for the invitation and looking forward to hear the presentations from ones and one. Give thanks, Rastafari.
Give thanks, Ancient, Rastafari. So, yes, Ancient, and I have that limitation of the 40-minute intervals, so I had just exhausted the second 40 minutes. Now I think we would be in the last 10 minutes very shortly. And we're just on the introduction of NRC. So when this interval lapses, we're going to request the Ancient to make use of the same link again to rejoin the platform, so that I just forward like that through the powers. Rastafari.
I refer, give thanks.
Give thanks. Yes, on the introduction that was made by the member spokesperson, Rasmutwena there. Yes, also on the constitution of New Race Consciousness, on the section of the annexures, the subsection 2.4 there, in terms of the Ethiopian Royal Solomonic Dynasty, how the NRC understands, the Ethiopian Royal Solomonic Dynasty is that it is the house of King David, who is the Blessed One of Israel, referenced in the Book of Kings in the Bible, which tells I about the union of King Solomon and Queen of Sheba. This union gave birth to Emperor Menelik I, who is the founder of the dynasty of the Solomonic dynasty in Ethiopia. Emperor Haile Selassie I is the 225th descendant of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. As it is the vision of the consciousness to promote and bring the light and teachings of Emperor Haile Selassie I, it is equally important that it make itself known and acknowledged by the Ethiopian royal house of King David as the custodians of many teachings of Emperor Haile Selassie I, who was born on the 23rd of July, 1892 in Ethiopia, in the province of Harar. He was born Tafari Makone. Tafari means the one to be feared in Amharic. Haile Selassie is a baptismal name and a throne name, which means the first power of the Holy Trinity. Haile Selassie holds other titles of honor and glory, such as King of Kings, Lord of Lords, Conquering Lion of the tribe of Judah, elect of God, elect of himself. Like, the Prince of Peace, the Wonderful Counselor, International Field Marshal, International Commander in Chief, World War II, Earth Rightful Ruler, King of Righteousness. Emperor Haile Selassie I led Ethiopia into modern civilization. He established the OAU in Addis Ababa in 1963. He built many schools in Ethiopia than any other head of state around the world in his entire reign. Emperor Haile Selassie I ruled Ethiopia longer than any other previous ruler. In the 300-year history of the Solomonic dynasty, during the reign of Emperor Haile Selassie, there was peace in Ethiopia. Even during the periods where the external forces, except during the periods where the external forces, the invasion of the fascist Mussolini wanted to conquer Ethiopia, but all for naught. So basically, this, is how even members of NRC recognize, the ancient Ethiopian Royal Solomonic line, which, according to the Ethiopian Constitution, which was introduced in 1931 and revised in 1955, the line should now continually be attached perpetually to the line of Emperor Haile Selassie I. So the glory that was King Solomon is now in Ethiopia with the Emperor Haile Selassie I and Empress Waizero Menen there in Ethiopia, in the Ivastandi, as it has come down to INI in this time. So INI would like to give thanks even for the introduction that is made by the ancient Papa Mutuena and the provisions, of the constitution of NRC, because it's one thing also to have a constitution, but it is quite another to become an embodiment, and the fulfillment, of that word in human form. So it's an opportunity, in as much as it may appear as a challenge, but it is also an opportunity, for INI to fulfill what INI need to fulfill in this time. So yes, with that being said, I'm not sure, but it would appear that INI still have a little over 10 minutes. So I am inclined to maybe give to the next, to the first speaker on the program, but which is Papa Mudupi, So Papa Mudupi was born and raised in Gauteng province. He is a member of New Race Consciousness. He holds a bachelor's degree in early childhood development and is currently an educator. He is a member of the Rastafari community, and his teaching philosophy is quality education. So basically, Papa Marvin, we have a little less than 10 minutes left, my lord. So can I be able to start, make use of maybe this and then continue on the second interval, on the following interval?
Give thanks, my elder. I can, my elder, but currently I check that the eye has a
I have already introduced myself. I am now going straight to the reasons for the Empress Menen to be coronated simultaneously with the Emperor. In the autobiography of Emperor, My Life in Ethiopia's Progress, Volume 1, the Emperor explains the reasons for the coronation of the Empress. The procedure for the enthronement of the Empress is today different from what it used to be previously. According to the historical study of the earlier practice, the Empress was not anointed with oil of kingship on the grounds that she did not share in rulership with the Emperor. The crown, being merely symbolic, was very small. It was in the palace that the Emperor placed the crown on her head and not in church. This occurred on the third day, for it was not permitted for her to be crowned on the same day as the Emperor. But now it was determined after consultation and was accordingly carried out that, except for the regal anointing, the Archbishop should place the crown on her and put the diamond ring on her finger, and that this should be done on the same day, jointly with the coronation of the Emperor. So the lesson that we draw from this is that we must not be dogmatic. We must be open to change, because Emperor Haile Selassie I teaches us that change begets change. The Bishop of the Southern Province made the first offering, a diamond ring of great value, and I quote, "Let your faith shine even as these jewels," as he placed it on her finger. The Abuna held the crown of Empress Menen and gave it to Emperor Haile Selassie I, who took it for a few moments and handed it back to the Abuna, saying, "I have been blessed to receive from your hands the crown of empire, which a God granted to me. So now it is my firm desire that my Empress shall share in my glory, receiving from me this crown, which I ask your holiness to place upon her." For instance, the emperor's persona of the faith and piety is evident in how much time she spent with the church people. She donated her crown to the Church of Jerusalem after Ethiopian victory in 1941. We observe the empress's kindness as she was a humanitarian. She inherited money and built orphanages that were sustainable. We see the wisdom of the Empress when she advised the Emperor to go to the League of Nations to appeal for justice. She was able to change the mind of the Emperor. Worthy was she to be called Empress. We witnessed the intelligence of the Empress when she gathered women of the world to oppose Mussolini's war in Ethiopia. We honor the Empress as she was the head of women in Ethiopia. Taking the Empress's crown from the hands of the Emperor, the Abuna offered a prayer. "Oh, our Lord, place this crown of glory and joy upon the brow of thy servant, the Empress Menen. Make it a crown of charity, piety, wisdom, and of intelligence. Oh, Heavenly Father, make this crown to be a crown of honor, glory, so be it." How Empress Menen inspire women and families in general. She is the first recipient of the Fertility Order Award, which was created by Emperor Haile Selassie I. Their union lasted for over half a century. She is a very humanitarian person and care for the poor. She is a champion of Rastafari creed. Let the hungry be fed, naked clothed, sick nourished, aged protected, infants cared for, and the ignorant instructed. She built orphanages for protection and care of the homeless children, schools for the illiterate. She presided over the Ethiopian Red Cross for the sick during the war. She renovated churches to vouchsafe the elderly priests. That was the end of my presentation. I also want to make note of the following. Fears are still alive about the possible persecution of anyone perceived as being sympathetic to the royal family of Emperor Haile Selassie I and Empress Waizero Mene. Considering the blood letting against such supporters by the regime of Mengistu Haile Mariam, which followed the reign of the royal couple, hence only little information is currently available in the public. But New Race is trying by all means to search for more on the Empress Isis.
Yes, I, Empress Dami, give thanks for that informative, presentation on the rare, coronation of an empress, such a rare sight in Africa, a break indeed with tradition, very informative indeed. So it's good to know that, the Emperor Haile Selassie was such a farsighted, to introduce that particular aspect of being crowned together with the empress, to challenge maybe a particular narrative, a popular narrative, and also to bring about, introduce particular waves of changes, positive waves of positive change. So yes, I will give thanks, Empress, for that presentation. I see that Anna would still have sufficient time also, to maybe have another speaker on the podium, because I see the Empress's presentation was very brief as compared to the previous speaker. Nevertheless, it was very informative and highly of quality, Yes, which is what even I give thanks and access for every time. So yes, in this time, I hope the eyes ready. Let Aman introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker will be Ras Moabi. Yes, Ras Moabi is born and raised in the Free State Province. He is the former member and chairperson of RAS at the Wits University. RAS is a former Rastafari Reggae Society and later Rastafari Appreciation Society. He is also the chief director of New Race Consciousness. He holds an honors degree in international relations from the University of the Witwatersrand, and he majored in politics. He also holds a BCom law degree from UNISA, and he is currently based in the Western Cape, doing research work in Parliament, the South African Parliament. Yes, I give thanks. I will be making a presentation on the political significance of the coronation of Emperor Haile Selassie and Empress Mene. Give thanks. Papa Moabi.
Yeah, greetings, ancients. In the name of the Most High, Emperor Haile Selassie and Empress Mene. Ancients, it's a, this is a, I think maybe I should start off by making this acknowledgement that this is the.
Yeah, Papa Moabi. Papa Moabi.
Yeah, ancient. I
Yes,
think if the eye can go to the first page, we give thanks. Yeah, ancient.
Yes, I may continue. Is this
Oh, we give thanks. I'm looking at the laptop here. It's not showing me the screen. Ancients, I'm going to briefly speak to the political significance of the coronation. You know, I think if you can go to the third slide, Ancient, or the second slide, you know, just to quickly to take the eye to what this presentation would have loved to reflect on was briefly on the history of Ethiopia, and was to have a brief reflection on slavery and the African diaspora, and was to look at Ethiopia and the modern world, and to speak to events of the Second World War, and to look at the African liberation movement, as well as the creation of the Organization for African Unity, known as the OAU. Can we go to the next slide? The history of Ethiopia is very fascinating. There's a lot of records. Many scholars, your Greek and Roman scholars, have written quite extensively about the Ethiopians. One poet by the name of Homer said Ethiopians are blameless. And Herodotus said the Ethiopians are long-lived because they do not drink wine at all. And these are the scholars who had written about Ethiopia many years ago. And the bravery of Ethiopia is also equally well documented. It is well known that Ethiopia refused to pay tribute to Cambyses and to the Persian kings. And we'll remember at some point in history, Persia was a great empire that had subdued many nations around the world. And we know of also Queen Gandak, also known as Queen Candace, who defeated Alexander the Great without lifting a sword, but only with the use of espionage or intelligence services. We know that Ethiopia has got a long history with its connection to Israel, with King Solomon, and throughout ages, Ethiopians have been making holy pilgrimages to the old city. And during this entire time, they were hardly disturbed by Muslim, even when the whole of Palestine was under Muslim domination. The Ethiopians were always given a special diplomatic, sort of like diplomatic relations, because even when they were making their pilgrimage to ancient city of Jerusalem, they would be allowed to openly display their Christian symbols, and they would be allowed to pray within so-called Muslim territories, whereas the other Christian nations were not given those kind of privileges. And this can also be traced back because of the history of the spread or the rise of Islam and how it was given religious refuge. in Ethiopia and the instruction that was given to the followers of Prophet Muhammad, may peace be upon him, that they should not lift a finger against the Ethiopians. And also when we read into the account of Emperor Theodros, who called himself the husband of Ethiopia and the fiancé of Jerusalem, we get accounts of an attempt by Ethiopian Empire to strengthen Christendom through the entire world in defense of the old city and to reclaim it from the captors, because it was under now the sphere of the Muslims. So this is just a brief history to have a sort of that contextual background about the greatness of the country that we are speaking about. And we would notice when we look into the history of Ethiopia, you know, there are times when it's been referred to as Abyssinia, it's Ethiopia, it's, you know, Africa. So there's always been, those words have been used interchangeably, you know, from the time even when the ancient Greeks used to refer to Ethiopians with that, the term Ethiop or Ethiop. That was basically a reference to dark-skinned people. Can we move on to the next slide, Aisha? We know that in the history of this continent that there was a period known as the transatlantic slave trade, where a lot of African men and women were taken to the Americas and to Europe. That's part of the history where we began to have huge numbers of people of African descent living outside the African continent. And this is a brutal history for Africans when you look into it. It's not part of this presentation to look into the deep history of slavery, but it's also to give an account of how millions of African diaspora got to find themselves where they found themselves outside the continent. And ever since the emergence of transatlantic slave trade, there's always been a yearning for liberation. You know, they've always fought against slavery. You know, there's always been a yearning for freedom and for liberation. And some of the developments that took place was education that was extended to the Africans who were taken into slavery. And some of those who were given missionary education came across a passage, Psalm 68 in the Old Testament, verse 31 that says, "Princess shall come out of Egypt. Ethiopia shall soon stretch out her hands unto God." So it was this passage that also gave a lot of Africans in the diaspora during the slave trade period a sense of hope that one day indeed there is a redemption for their kind. Because what was happening, part of the slavery was to instill the certain notions of perpetual servitude, that Africans were perpetual slaves. There was no sort of like redemption for them. So those who could now have the ability to read and write in the modern Western script came across this passage. And this is a passage that we later on to find its golden thread within the Ethiopian movement. The Ethiopian movement was a spiritual movement, but it was not only confined to spirituality. It had the socio-cultural elements of it, and it also had the political aspects of it. And this Ethiopian movement, its development is traced precisely to that reference that was found in Psalm 68 in the diaspora and on the African continent as well, as we would later on begin to learn how Africans at home and Africans in the diaspora began to establish relations that were meant to enhance their quest for liberation. And we know, for example, John Langa Libalele Dube was a pastor of the Ethiopian church. You know, Marcus Mosiah Gavi, you know, also born in the diaspora, was inspired by Edward Blyden. Blyden is one of those foremost Africans who regarded themselves as Ethiopians and were primarily guided by also these passages that I've referred to, Psalm 68, verse 31. Marcus Mosiah Garvey established UNIA, Universal Negro Improvement Association, in 1914. Can we move on to the next slide? So it is within this context that I'm briefly sharing some of this, so that when we begin to make reference to how the African diaspora could relate to the coronation, we also get to understand the roots of their awareness. Where did their consciousness, when was it first developed? This was done primarily to indicate that the basis have been there, that the soil was already fertile. We know that Ethiopia had for many years contact with the outside world, but with more like the modern world, relations were enhanced or became more intense during the time of Emperor Menelik. That's after the Berlin conference, where most European countries were now beginning to develop some sort of like an interest in having colonial territories on the African continent. And Ethiopia being independent began to attract a number of foreign embassies. And this increased particularly after the Battle of Adwa in 1896, after the Italians were humiliated and defeated at the Battle of Adwa. The Battle of Adwa, March 1896, was just one of the attempts by Italy when it tried to grab Ethiopia as its own colony. And all these things were happening at the time when Europe was displaying great sense of some sort of like nationalism. We know that around those times, Rastafari taught Europe, taught a number of European countries. He went to France, he went to Britain. He made a number of visits. And it was in the 1924 tour that I would like to quote, for example, the Vice Chancellor of Cambridge University, what he said about Rastafari when they had invited him for a special occasion where they were going to confer upon him a Doctor of Law and honorary degree. The name of the Vice Chancellor of Cambridge University around that time was Dr. Edmund Courtney Pierce. And he said, as we have heard of your initiative, he was speaking to Rastafari. At this time, Rastafari was regent, the crown prince, heir plenipotentiary to the Ethiopian crown. And he said to Rastafari, as we have heard of your initiative and perseverance in leading your country, Ethiopia, in wisdom and knowledge, we bestow upon you the honorary degree of Doctor of Law. And he went on to say, today there is amongst us Tafari Makonnen, Ethiopia's crown prince. He follows in the footsteps of his ancestors and possesses knowledge exceeding that of Orientals and Egyptians. He explores ancient and modern knowledge. He has studied all the ancient Christian traditions, and he concluded by saying to those who had gathered to witness this event, the special occasion, we therefore make known to all of you here Ethiopia's great Crown Prince and Regent, His Highness Tafari Makonnen, the hope of Ethiopia, who is descendant from ancient kings. Can we move on to the next slide? So ancients, what we now pick up is that all this show that even before we speak of the coronation itself, the world was now beginning to take great notice of Ethiopia. Ethiopia was now beginning to emerge or to take itself out from years and years of being an island of Christianity. Now the world was now beginning to notice Ethiopia. The League of Nations was one organization that was established after the First World War, and the intention of the League of Nations was to maintain peace around the world. Ethiopia Ethiopia or ancients, I think we give thanks, Papa Tula. I think the ancient has just made me aware that the link is going to expire within the first.
Yeah, give thanks, Papa Modrena.
Yes, I give thanks, Ancient.
Yeah, give thanks, ancient. I'll get guidance from the eye.
Yeah, I may continue. The
I-
recording is in progress here.
give thanks. So ancients, what we notice from the few slides, previous slides, is that long before coronation, Ethiopia had already made its mark. In the ancient world, Ethiopia occupied a very, very specific, unique role and made its own unique contribution. And within the modern dispensation, within the modern era, we also noticed that Ethiopia was beginning to make that meaningful contact with the modern world. And I would skip this slide that speaks about the coronation. I think Papa Mutupi and Empress Kitami had spoken extensively on the coronation. Can I move on to the next slide?
Yes, the one of World War II, ne?
Yeah, give thanks, ancient. Yes. Ancient, the aggression, Italy's aggression on Ethiopia took place 5 years after the coronation. We know that the coronation of His Majesty, as the ancient has indicated, Papa Mutupi, had begun to give hope to many Black people on the continent and outside of the continent, where millions of Africans began to have renewed sense of hope, of one day being freed from the vestiges of colonialism, oppression, and all sorts of crimes against humanity that Africans at home and the ones in the diaspora who had been taken that side, many of them during the transatlantic slave trade. So Ethiopia, because of that coronation and because of that awareness, it had then began to be seen as a symbol of hope, of political independence, of independence in all sorts of manner that we understand it politically, economically, culturally, socially, politically, and spiritually. And by this time, Ethiopia was already a member of the League of Nations. And when Italy, in violation of the League of Nations covenant, attacked Ethiopia, it raised all sorts of complications. And one of those was around race relations. particularly for the British territories or territories that were under the British Empire, and all other colonial territories for that matter. Ethiopia asked the League of Nations to invoke Article 16 because Article 16 of the League of Nations made stipulations or provisions that if one member of the League of Nations is to be attacked by another member, all members of the League of Nations, if they find that the one who's attacking is an aggressor, members of the League of Nations would make available all the resources of the League of Nations in defense of the one who's been attacked, and that would be a victim in this regard. So now the aggressor was Italy, and now members of the League of Nations needed to act, but they couldn't. This war in South Africa was understood differently. You had the white minority party that had its own concerns, wanting to protect their own interest, who viewed the war differently. Like, for example, on the 12th of August, 1935, John Smuts, who was at one time a prime minister, said about the war, "There is no doubt that the invasion of Abyssinia by Italy will arouse anxious feelings all over Africa between white and black, and may well have serious results. The African does not yet look on the European as an enemy, but this trouble may raise intense racial and color feelings and make the position of the European much more difficult. It may spread all over the continent, and you may find that every African will sympathize with Abyssinia." And we also know that it was also during this time of the conflict that even members or ex-servicemen who had fought in the First World War were willing to go and join the Ethiopian army and fight on the side of the Ethiopians against Italy. So this conflict, this war of aggression against Ethiopia had began to raise all sorts of complications, not only within the colonial territories, but within Europe itself, within the League of Nations. And along in other accounts, when the failure of the League of Nations to act against Italy, it was also understood within the context of an African country that has been invaded by a European country, that it was sort of like seen impossible that the West would mobilize their resources, being white, at the age where racism or white supremacy was being embraced, that they would mobilize their resources in defense of an African country, because that would literally mean that they would have to spill the blood of another European country, because Italians are white. So it had those race relation dynamics within it. Can we move on to the next slide? And there were a number of protest actions that were organized by the League Against Imperialism and the Anti-Fascist League here in South Africa, where they had organized a hands-off Abyssinia campaign. You know, the trade unions, they were boycotting Italian goods. And it was also during this war of aggression against Ethiopia that the Ethiopian Zionist churches, as maybe they would refer to them, but these were churches that came out of the Ethiopian movement of the 1870s because of the coronation, because also the event of the coronation brought Ethiopia more to the knowledge of the outside world. And during this time of the Italy's aggression against Ethiopia, we begin to notice that a number of Africans began to join these independent churches. In Bloemfontein in 1935, there was All African Union Convention that had also passed a unanimous resolution calling for the League sanction against Italy. So these are political events that were beginning to influence and that were being also incorporated by people in South Africa. So the indifference of the League of Nations is well known. It is known that, for example, Italy had supported Ethiopia's membership into the League of Nations. And one of the arguments that why Italy had supported Ethiopia's entry into the League of Nations, they had felt that at the time they were not having enough powers to can be able to expand or themselves as a colonial power. So they thought by supporting Ethiopia's membership into the League of Nations, they were protecting Ethiopia for themselves, because they had known that at the time other European powers, for example, Britain and France, sort of like also had interest of wanting to colonize Ethiopia. So these are the international politics or international relations there that we find playing themselves around Ethiopian interest as one independent African country that has never been colonized. The collapse of the League of Nations, for example, to reflect briefly on the hypocrisy of the League of Nations itself or its indifference, can be seen in one plan that Samuel Hoare and Pierre Laval had devised in December of 1935, where they sort of had their own intention, thinking that Ethiopian emperor would be given some mountainous region that he would rule under, maybe some kind of like maybe a Bantustan, as maybe they would later have them in South Africa after 1948, and that Italy would be given some fertile land in Ethiopia. But this plan came to a naught. It failed as it was leaked before it could be tabled before the League of Nations. These were major developments if you the IPRAs begin to think about them, given the fact that you have one independent country on the continent of Africa that has never been colonized, and you have these big powers who are sort of trying to wrestle each other for its stake. The League of Nations collapsed, and then its predecessor, its successor, is the United Nations. And one major difference between the United Nations and the League of Nations is the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. The League was only concerned with the freedom, inequality, and self-determination of states, not necessarily with that of individual rights. Because its establishment, it was precisely after the First World War, and what those big powers in Europe had sought to do in terms of guaranteeing and safeguarding their own interests. So it did not have, for example, provisions that would speak to the fate of colonial territories, as we later find out. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Ancient, is that the last slide? Oh, okay. Thank you. The second, oh no, thanks. The OAU was established in 1963. And we also making reference to the OAU precisely because this is also the significance of coronation. 2nd November 1930. 33 years later, you have the establishment of the OAU. It wouldn't have been possible had the coronation not been, if the coronation had not taken place, we wouldn't have had the Second World War, as John F. Kennedy said when His Majesty visited the US, that precisely the reason why we, the world, descended into the Second World War was also the failure of the world to listen to or to heed the warning that the Ethiopian emperor gave before the League of Nations. The OAU is significant in that sense that it also takes place in Addis Ababa, the very same city where the coronation took place, in a country that has never been colonized. And before the formation of the OAU, there were two blocks. One group was called the Casablanca, and this group was composed of transitional governments of Algeria, it was Morocco, it was Ghana, it was Guinea, Mali, and later on they were joined by Egypt, and they had wanted an immediate creation of United States of Africa. And you also had another group, Monrovia, that consisted of about 24 states, and this they believed in the gradual approach. Of course, they had their own draft charters, but at the end of the day, in that meeting of Addis Ababa, the charter that was used to establish the OAU was the Ethiopian draft charter. After the success of the establishment of the OAU, the was a question that was put around the headquarters of the OAU. Where would the headquarters be placed? And there were a number of countries that wanted the headquarters to be placed in their countries. Senegal had an interest. I think Liberia also had an interest, and Ghana had an interest, as well as Egypt. But unanimously, it was then decided by the conference that the matter was not going to be put to a vote. And the conference then resolved unanimously that Ethiopia should be given the headquarters, the seat, as the capital seat of African government, precisely in recognition of the role that Ethiopia has played as the only independent country to have never been colonized, and the role that it had played in assisting other African countries and liberation movements towards the independence. So it is for that reason that today we have the seat of the OAU, now the African Union, in Addis Ababa. It's in that long line, and all these were made possible because of that coronation. You know, if there had never been the coronation, we would be telling a different history of the continent. Maybe perhaps would still be colonized. Can we move on to the next slide? And this is the second slide, and the role that was played by Ethiopia in assisting other liberation movements is very, very much well documented. For example, we've made mention of the Ethiopian movement of the 1800s and how this Ethiopian movement of the 1800s had helped in terms of establishing the independent churches, not only in South Africa, but also throughout the entire continent and in the diaspora. You had in America, for example, churches that were known as Abyssinian Church. So they were spread all over. You have the oldest liberation movement on the African continent that traces the seeds of its formation to the Ethiopian movement of the 1870s. You have a number of liberation movements. After the first liberation movements, you then had, especially after the end of the Second World War, you then began to have this wave of liberation movements that were now committed towards independence or decolonization. And this can also be traced back to the arguments that Ethiopia has been making within the League of Nations towards decolonization, and already and again during its participation during the Peace Paris conference and all other conferences that took place in San Francisco, and ultimately that led to the formation of the United Nations, that at the center of the main arguments that Ethiopia was making was around self-determination for all colonial territories. And the support that was given to many other liberation movements, the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, and this support was also consolidated through the committee that was known as the OAU Liberation Committee that was headquartered in Tanzania, were all African independent African states at the time. The ones that had established the OAU, they were 32 in number. They made a commitment towards contributing to the liberation of African countries that were still under colonialism and apartheid. So even in terms of not only symbolically that the coronation, in our presentation, we've touched on the periods preceding the coronation and how this had begun to ideologically and philosophically inform Africans who were now waging a war against slavery, against colonialism, that they began to look up to Ethiopia. Can we move on to the next slide? I think I might have exhausted my 30 minutes that has been given. Oh, that was the last slide. So we give thanks, Ancient. That's the presentation about the significance of the 2nd November coronation. Significant, not only the way it has been widely acknowledged that as the only independent monarch that many nations in Europe, the Americas, they went and sent their envoys and they went to recognize the only independent monarch. It defied everything. It defied even logic, because you are at the height of colonialism, and now you then have all these countries that are claiming supremacy, that are claiming to colonize these barbaric nations because they are bringing them to civilization, going to an independent country and paying a tribute and bowing and acknowledging the sovereignty and the independence of Ethiopia. And we've made mention of the Cambridge, or the Vice Chancellor of Cambridge University. Even before the coronation, we had spoken about Tafari, and that he possessed knowledge far that exceeds that of Orientals and ancient Egyptians. And if we ask ourselves who are the Orientals and who are the ancient Egyptians, we know these are the people that in history a lot of greatness has been written about them, not only in terms of their contribution in terms of math and science, but also in terms of the development of political systems. Because when you look at the writings of Plato, of Socrates, these are the people who have been schooled in Ethiopia. So what you will then begin to have is that even the art of governance, or the art and science of governance, as Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates began to teach in ancient Greece, that they had learned from Ethiopia. So this is what the Vice Chancellor of Cambridge was basically communicating and making known to those ones who have been called to witness the conferment of an honorary degree on Tafari. A lot, Ancient. Let me humble myself on this note. If there's an engagement in terms of like reasoning, I thought it would be more often an open reasoning session. You know, I tried to make my presentation more like just to share, not necessarily to go extensive into the coronation, as I've indicated that Papa Mutupi and Sister Kitami had went extensively into the events of the day. So on my part was to try and be broad and look into the diaspora before the coronation, the awareness around Ethiopia, so that we begin to have an appreciation that even when Ethiopia, when the coronation happened already, there was already a certain expectation. Prophetically, Papa Mutupi had spoken about that, what even Marcus Garvey had said. You already had a lot of Black people who at the time where there appeared to be no hope for Black people all over the world, they were being told that, look, there will be a particular event that will happen in Africa. It will be the crowning of a Black king. And when that happens, you must know that your deliverance or your liberation or your freedom is very close. And it was indeed very close, because 33 years after that coronation, we had the establishment of the OAU. And we know the role of the OAU that it played in liberation of the entire Africans. And we're still saying that that role that is meant to be played by the OAU is still very far from over, as we know that the mandate or the 4 phases of liberation that were adopted when the OAU was established were around the political sphere. The second one that we're in, it's the economic sphere, and then it's the socio-cultural sphere, and the last realm is the spiritual liberation. So these are the 4 phases that the OAU founding fathers had committed the organization to say this must be achieved, and it's only upon the achievement of all these 4 phases that Africans can truly consider themselves as liberated people. So even in terms of what we see in South Africa, what happened in 1994, South Africa was the last of the African countries to receive political independence. And it only remains that, political independence. There are other people who want Africans to think that Africans are free, totally free, you know, but that's not true. Africans are politically free, and this freedom can also be linked to the coronation that we are today celebrating and marking, the 2nd of November, to liberate people, Africans, politically. There's still a lot of work to be done. You know, I was looking, in conclusion, Ancient, I was looking at the videos and the images of the coronation. And in contrast, you know, and remember, this is a coronation that happens in 1930. And I'm looking at the images of the coronation that took place yesterday. It's like there's a huge regression. Huge. You know, how did we get here? That you can have a coronation, 2nd November, of the 225th direct descendant of King Solomon and Queen of Sheba. And the descendant, that line, the lineage of King Solomon, you know, it's very ancient, because we can take it back to the father of King Solomon, is King David. And to the father of King David, Jesse. And to the father of Jesse, Methuselah. And the father of Methuselah, ancient Enoch. So it's a long history of Ethiopia, you know, that we can speak of. And it is in this conclusion that this history, it's worth telling, because it is it also contradicts a whole lot of lies that have been told. For example, when the emperor was crowned on the 2nd of November, 1930, the world and all the representatives who were there, they were told that here's the king of Israel. But then what happened is that in 1948, 18 years later, the United Nations took a resolution to establish the state of Israel. It's of interest because it also raises a whole lot of issues in terms of international relations or international politics. What does that mean? If you read in the Ebra Negast, the Ethiopians have written it very, very clear that the land that is known as Palestine or Saudi Arabia or Arabia or what, that land is the territory of ancient Ethiopia, you know. So these are ancient claims, besides the claim that already Ethiopia still has, you know, in Jerusalem. We know the presence of the Ethiopian churches and the presence of Ethiopians still today. It's very, very much documented. But what we are noticing and what we are learning about 2nd November is that that coronation, it raises a lot of questions. Not only political questions, it raises economic questions, it raises socio-cultural questions, it raises spiritual questions, and all those questions will be addressed. You know, the ancients of Rastafari faith had spoken to many of these. Certain questions have been raised. The present generation is doing that, and for generations to come, will continue doing that. So ancients, we give thanks. That would be my end of presentation. And my apologies for taking much time, most time. Rastafari.
Yes, I give thanks, Asian, Papa Moabi there. Yes, I. On the political significance there, you know, very extensive, you know, well-rounded presentation there by the eye there, you know. Yes, I taking eye from historical reflections, you know, right through to the coronation, even beyond the coronation. But just to highlight that, you know, Ethiopia from time immemorial, you know, has been and remains the golden age, you know, yes, of all time. So Ethiopia and His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie now seated on the throne is the central figure, you know, the culmination of all glory, you know, as it were from such time in Ethiopia. Is the custodian, you know, of all that is Ethiopia. So yes, I will give thanks, Ancient, for that presentation, you know. And I check even in this time, is less than gonna be less than a minute, you know. Yes, I gonna be less than a minute. So I think in this time, we just gonna prepare to maybe have the next speaker. You know, the next speaker is gonna be the Ancient Jabulani. Ancient Jabulani, you know that you're just gonna go to the next. You're gonna go to the same link again. You know, true. Yes, but the ancient was born in the blessed Trevor Hall, you know, by his Jamaican-born parents of African descent. Grew up in the UK from 1950s until 5 January 1982, and the ancient repatriated and migrated himself to Africa. And the first place where the ancient landed is Kenya, where he has been living in Africa since, and is now an elder within the Rastafari Livity for 40 years, striving for full emancipation of all INI Africans. The ancient is also a youth social worker specialist in community development projects. And the ancient during the apartheid era. He helped development of the reggae music industry in Southern Africa. Yes, I give thanks, family. We would have been cut off there. So, I think I'm gonna just start over again for the benefit of all. The ancient Jabulani was born in Blessed Trevor Hall by his Jamaican parents of African descent. He grew up in the UK from the 1950s until 5 January 1982, when he repatriated himself to Africa, where he first landed in Kenya. The ancient have been living in Africa since and is now an elder within the Rastafari Levity for 40 years, striving for full emancipation of all Africans. The ancient talent include being an artist, musician, dancer, selector, sound engineer, producer, events manager, a qualified carpenter, and joiner. Ancient Jabulani is a youth community social worker specialist in community development projects and centers. The ancient is now an elder father, grandfather, and great-grandfather, and brother and uncle to many others. During the apartheid era, the ancient helped to develop the reggae music industry in Southern Africa and produced a double album of Bishop Tutu's speeches. Then the ancient was banned from South Africa as a cultural activist. He then went to Botswana to organize the first cultural society in the University of Botswana called Loshalaba. After organizing the biggest ever independence celebration for Botswana, the ancient was then invited to Zimbabwe to develop the reggae music industry and became a permanent resident of Zimbabwe. Mostly, the ancient concentrates on farming projects, currently with him Empress in Mpumalanga. Yes, briefly, that is the ancient Jabulani. And I would also like to indicate to I also that ancient Jabulani is also a beneficiary in one of New Race Consciousness financial vehicle, the trust, which is called the Zion Trust. Ancient Jabulani as a representative of the community in the Living Spora has since the establishment of the Zion Trust been the beneficiary representing the community in the Living Spora. And the ancient has also been to the Central University of Technology at the invitation of the Rastafari Appreciation Society to come and present a lecture also. So yes, Anna is also familiar with the works of the ancient on the ground. Give thanks and Isis, Rastafari. Ancient Jabulani to present on the relations between the global Rastafari community and the Ethiopian royal family and the Ethiopian Crown Council. As I know that as I celebrate the coronation of the Emperor Haile Selassie and the Empress Waziri Menen, the throne and the Crown Council of Ethiopia is currently in exile based on the situation and the developments that took place from 1974 during the time of Mengistu. So there is a particular situation that the Crown Council and the Ethiopian royal family would find itself in. And some of the situations, maybe the ancient Jabulani can highlight what are the situations and also the relations, and also what kind of more strengthening of relations. How can I strengthen the relations going forward? So at this moment, and I would, without any further ado, give to the ancient Papa Jabulani. Give thanks.
Rastafari greetings. Yes, and I give thanks for the invitation to make this presentation to the new race, because it is the honor, yes, for I to be here. Yes, as a member of the new race, we are talking in relations now where I can just give a little of what is happening on in terms like we're saying now with the royal house, the royal family of Ethiopia. It was very interesting and good to hear when someone's giving the accounts of coronation of His Majesty and Her Majesty, and the fullness of what it means to not just I and I as a Rastafari community, but the realization of I and I Emperor's role within not just Africa, but the world, where it comes in terms of the upkeeping from the League of Nations to the United Nations, and also the very significant role in the making of the OAU to what has now transformed to the AU and still functioning for the unification of all Africa. Now,
Loud and clear.
I give time. Yes. So with the deposing of His Imperial Majesty in 1974, where we see now the exiling of most of the royal house that survived the massacre, which was perpetrated by the Dergs, headed by Mengistu, Eliar Mengistu. Again, as you can see, throughout the continent of Africa, the colonizing factor, first, they had to take the head, literally take the heads of our kings, queens, prophets, those who were our spiritual leaders, healers, and so forth, and to then be able to control the people them spiritually by subduing us spiritually and then controlling us physically. Slavery, colonization, reduce I and I kings to what the colonizers would call now chiefs. Now, this is one of the ways that now they do not want to see the rise of I and I as a people with the strength of heads, which within African context, our kings are our gods. By replacing our kings with an unseen God, and then putting the heads of states, the ones in terms of the like recently now the turmoil going on about the death of Queen Elizabeth II, and showing even how they can still disrespect those who we are being made to see as our heads of state by even forcing them to jump on a bus to go to the funeral of the Queen of England, right? Whereas other heads of states, royal houses and so forth were allowed to still go, you know, within their entourage and so forth. It was good to see that the now president of Ethiopia, and again, we're gone that full circle again from Makeda, when we taught the Queen of Sheba, to now our head of state of Ethiopia is a female, a woman. You see now, through that, the lineage from His Majesty, where we can talk directly within biblical context, and then the biblical context through the King James Version, that will talk of the lineage spurred by King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, which sitting on the throne in Ethiopia, the throne of Judah. We would then talk of bibliothèque, which is collection of books, scripts, and so forth, which is more ancient than the King James Version, would show that going really further back within the lineage of our ancients from the Kushite Empire. Now, you see, what the rewriting of our history by our colonizers will want to create the strength and the might of our kings, our queens, our ancient emperors, right? To the point where the way that they use I to even overthrow our king. This was, and then using that to try to even more subdue the fullness of our royal house throughout the continent. This has been the way of maintaining that subduance spiritually and physically on the African people. Now, the Rastafari community were in a little disarray during that period where we talk of the overthrowing of His Majesty. And then when ones want to put it that His Majesty is dead, this kind of went very sour towards the Rastafari, because you see enough ones was jumping up, Christian them, even certain Muslims, all kind of ones and ones who was against Rastafari was jumping up and saying, no, your God dead, what you gonna do? Really? It was like a big joke to I, even in Jamaica, England, America, to really try to subdue the Rastafari community that stood for His Majesty as God and King. Trying to wipe away the story of His Imperial Majesty Emperor Selassie I, seeing that I and I even glorify him by, as the only community that actually celebrates the coronation of His Imperial Majesty and Her Imperial Majesty with great grandeur in some of I countries there in the West. A lot of what now is being known of His Imperial Majesty on the continent has been through the Rastafari rise on the continent, bringing in information of His Majesty, the Royal House, to the point where even the rekindling and the rising of our royal houses within our respective countries on the continent, and finding the lineage and linkage of our kings and queens from even here in South Africa throughout Africa to the Royal House of Ethiopia. Now, Rastafari organizations, movements, and rising, not many really were directly involving themselves with the Royal House. Even now, you will find that it is mostly still the 12 tribes of Israel, which was founded by Prophet Gad, Bernard Carrington, with Dr. Bernard Carrington, we'll call him now Prophet Gad. You'll find that most of those who were in exile in America were being looked after by members of the 12 tribes of Israel. Even today, the crown prince Zara Yacob, buried within a 12-tribe cistern, is now living in Ethiopia. Zara Yacob, the son of Asfawasin, who was the crown prince that was to sit on the throne after His Majesty. His demise was now the cause. When we say now prophecy, will show that until Shiloh come, because His Majesty was what will say the last to sit directly on the throne of Judah. Now, he sat on the throne through a lot of pressure. This was Asfawasi, and after doing so, he received a stroke, which showed that he was not supposed to sit on the throne. His Majesty, again, showing that His Majesty is not dead, for once and once to then install and put someone else on the throne of Ethiopia, the throne of Judah. Now, the Smithsonians are trying to maintain and control certain ones of the royal house, and in particularly the one that they, if anyone is to be installed and put on the throne, the one that they would want to really support and put on the throne is Prince Ermias. Now, this is where there's certain contention still within the royal house. There is still a lot of ones not too sure how they can receive, because in Ethiopia, through certain advice, that when ones were trying to say no, the royal house should take control, and it's only come to the fore now that the prime minister of Ethiopia is very much pro the royal house of Ethiopia and trying to help again to bring the royal house within the Ethiopia, because it was never recognized during the time of the Derg's rule, right up to when the after Mengistu, you had the one that does take over and then create a lot of confusion by even changing the land grant in Shashamane. You will find that the 12 tribes have continued to do their best to work with those within the royal house and the royal family. Now, there is ones and ones who are trying to establish more links with, because unfortunately, because of the way that the order has placed itself, even within the infiltration of various of the Rastafari organizations and movement and houses and mansions, to keep a lot of contention going on, even between the houses, right? So that the recognition of bringing the strength of the royal houses together, even here on the continent, when we talk of Rastafari and African tradition, Africa, when we talk of African indigenous knowledge, we find that a lot of the houses and mansions of Rastafari do not uphold and strengthen themselves within getting the true indigenous knowledge and linking even with their own chiefs and kings within their own continent, tribes, because we find that there is a lot of ones who are saying they are Ras, denying their own lineage to their royal house or tribe in their own countries here on the continent. The few that are doing so, because again, there is this misdirection that is going on through the embracing of religion, the churchical side of Rastafari, where we say now ones will be embracing the teachings through the King James Version, disregarding the fullness of our own indigenous knowledge from the ancient times. Many would embrace, yes, from the Solomonic order, right? And not aligning traditionally, where this now could have also helped to strengthen our local existence within our lineage of our royal houses from right here in South Africa, going right up to Ethiopia. The lineage is still very much there. I personally have sat with various of the kings within this region in Southern Africa, and they've expressed and shown, yes, they have their knowledge of their lineage to the Ethiopian royal family, bloodline. Now, because of colonization and the restriction that colonization is still doing through our so-called political independence and not actual full independence spiritually, because most of our so-called independent leaders are either Christian or Muslim, but Christian through the Catholic, Anglican, and then all the denominations that arise, right? But not recognizing the fullness of the ancient Melchizedek order. Right? So therefore, we are in a situation now where even given strength to ones on ones where we can consolidate our economic wealth to then be affordable, to then raise our royal houses respectively, linking them directly. So through the royal houses rise the unification, the true unification of all Africans. Look at the role that His Majesty play by bringing together all the tribes and all the tribes and clans in Ethiopia during the coronation. Again, highlighting his bloodline linkage within majority of the clans and the tribes in Ethiopia. This again dispel a lot of the where Muslim and Christian divide, because the tradition held ones on ones together regardless of that, right, of the religious orders. Because traditionally, it is still the main link that colonizers try to sever by even taking the heads of our kings and queens and making sure that that subduance forces even within constitutional rights within most of the countries, even within marriage. That is why even when we look at what took place just yesterday, it's like a mockery when you look at a president is the one who is given the authority that someone that a king, right, is basically given that authority that he can reign over his people in the country by a president who is not even of directly that lineage of the kings and within the tribal lines. Now, this shows that how colonization still maintains that subduance and forces authority over our royal houses. Within the Rastafari movement, we're still having these differences of opinion on how we should embrace African tradition. For ones who are even families to fully embrace their tradition, take their place and stand firm to say, yes, I can stand for Rastafari and I can stand for my people. Because again, it is as if the Rastafari community has divorced itself from even their own bloodline people. Because we said no more tribalism, but you see, the ism side is where we should put aside. Tribe is our identity. Clan is our identity from anciency. Once we embrace that and know that it brings our bloodlines together, then we would have no fear to be in support of our royal houses, even for us in the diaspora, or rather the living spora. They call it the diaspora to keep us like we are dead. But if we are embracing the fullness within the living spora, then we would have rise up the royal house long time within Ethiopia. Not necessarily to say we are going to put them on the throne, but within the context of still the leadership, the strength, and keeping a unification within the tribes and the clans within Ethiopia and fully throughout the continent. These are the things that we need to be looking at seriously. Because again, the separation that we find amongst ourselves as house and mansions, and no support going to the various houses that take on the various roles within their self, like to support and protect our royal houses. Then by protecting our royal houses, we protect our wealth. Protect our wealth. That way we can recognize that we are directly there to embrace and take back what is ours. We don't need to be arguing or waiting for reparations, whilst we can reparate ourselves by firmly taking control of what is ours. But we can only do that in numbers by embracing the ones and ones. And with that strength of numbers, no government will go against the full majority that will then show that they have the control of lands, all tribal lands is wealth. We can still take back lands which are controlled by the military through the churches, which colonize I and I. These are ways we can be reparating ourselves by changing the mindset of our people towards how they've embraced the religious orders of the colonizers. If we look seriously at how we can be consolidating because the Rastafari is still looked upon as the real emancipators. Because the recognition of us still embracing His Majesty. In many ways, ones are not seeing that fullness of the strength that our ancients, our traditional leaders are waiting for us to give that strength by unifying ourselves. Because we first talk of unification of all Africans, but we still have to unify all the houses and mansions. Because most of us with house and mansions are even taking on names and identities away from our African selves and no longer embracing who we truly are. Whilst we're not doing that, how then are we going to embrace the royal houses and enhance the true existence of us as a people of greatness, rather than taking on identities of our colonizers? There is still a lot of efforts through certain ones. I know of ones within the University of the West Indies trying to see how they can intellectually embrace, but then the Smithsonian has a hold on them. Again, we'll always try to steer them away from bringing the royal houses on the continent together through the rising of the Ethiopian royal house. These are a lot of the things that we're still to overcome. How even a lot of our intellectuals in Rastafari are even moving away from true African intellectuality in terms of African true indigenous knowledge, embracing what the universities and so forth of the control still through the Jesuits and maintaining these separations to keep us weak as nations within the continent. There is still a lot that we are fully unaware of because we've put ourselves in certain contexts or differences towards our ways to say now. We as African people at home and abroad, because since we've had the rising of trying to unify the Rastafari movement on the continent, there is a lot of efforts now because of the way that ones have embraced the church, Bible teachings on King James, Judaism, rather than the true throne of Judah that they're seated. Yes, I. Can I continue?
Yes, I, ancient. Yes, I. Well, it's just Iman and the ancient currently, but the ancient may continue because the thing is on record. So I will be able to share the recording with all I, you know. But
Ras.
the ancient would now have, would be flexible even now to, just deliberate. And then after the ancient, we're gonna have the comments, questions, and the answer session. So it's just a continuation. Yes, I ancient. So I see right now it's just the two of I, but I'm optimistic that the eyes will just continue looking on like that. They will come on board. Yes, I ancient.
Yes, with what is really taking place now, what I would say now is that there is more need, especially for the Rastafari houses and mansions, to start really working together. Seek out and embrace those who are doing these works on the ground with the royal family in Ethiopia. Seek out and realize the linkage that we have through our royal houses in our respective countries, through our tribal chiefs, kings, and queens. Recognizing that bloodline to know that, yes, we have that inheritance that is our direct wealth, so that we can use that to strengthen and move forward with then unifying our people in the true sense of where I would say Rastafari can be on the continent and also globally. Because once we can recognize fully our strengths within ourselves on the continent, globally, ones and ones then has a more strength to identify. It would then open up more for repatriation. Reparations will come more practical once we have fully identified ourselves as one people, knowing where we are from, who is our bloodline, and then engaging in more business in order to bring our trading wealth and so forth around the globe. Because you see, the one thing we as African people are not realizing, our numbers is of serious strength globally. Under the mode of being servants of servants, this is where we lose sight of our real strength as in numbers, because we see ourselves as servants rather than as masters. Once we do that and find the true linkage, not as masters of ourselves, but as masters for our personal concerns, but brothers, sisters, one family, then we can then realize the fullness that we'll see that now many of our royal linkage throughout the globe are still there, not being recognized, not being supported, but being controlled by the so-called Smithsonians, the Jesuits, the Jews, the Christian, Anglican, Catholic churches, and the Muslim. Because even when you look at the strength that the Nation of Islam could be given to the royal house if they were to recognize the fullness and acceptance, right? We would have, when it comes, we don't have to even worry about who we're going to fight, because we would have the strongest standing army of people globally than any British, Russian, Chinese, or Americans, because once the Americans realize, so remember the Americans is a mixture of nations, of people, but the largest mix is of African descent. Once they realize their true Africanness and rise up, then we would be much more, in strength. Once we realize our bloodline traditionally and the real wealth that we do have, we wouldn't have to be begging or crying for assistance, because we'll be doing that for ourselves. So it's first that we need to seriously look at what the coronation of His Majesty did do for I and I as African. See the real reason why all other nations from around the world sent emissaries, kings, princes, queens, princesses, because their bloodline is of I and I, those who call themselves kings and queens out there in Europe, out there in even various Asian, Indonesian, American. They had to come for the crowning of His Majesty and bow down. The churches themselves had to maintain that, because had they not, then, you see, they would not have needed to then really find control of Palestine. 40, remember, in the crowd, when is the victory of His Majesty against Mussolini? After the victory, Abyssinia was now named officially Ethiopia. 8 years after, we're talking now, Israel, the Jews, those who call themselves Jews who are not Hebrew, as it is written in the scriptures, in the Psalms, had to now take control of Palestine, which is an annexed part of Ethiopia, Abyssinia, just to show biblically they, the because their colonization factor puts them ahead of our royal house in the belief syndrome that they have set through Christendom. So now it is for us to revive our kings, our queens, support them to the fullness, especially those who see themselves truly as Rastafari. And with these few words, I give thanks. Blessed.
Yes, ancient. Yes, we give thanks. We give thanks, ancient. Yes, for such a powerful reflection, ancient, wonderful presentation. On the really the background on the royal house. The relations among I and I. The community of Rastafari, who has appeared to be supportive, the challenges, that are there of Rastafari being able to identify with that particular royal house, and even generally with I immediate royal families, So the recognition and acceptance of King James perspective, maybe over the indigenous perspectives, as I check there, and that there's an acknowledgement that there's a need to support the Ethiopian royal house, and for even to get back in Ethiopia, and even to be able to lead society again, but not to enthrone anyone, as indicated that that attempt also had its adverse effects, where even the crown prince, as it were, got a stroke, So certain things would have to be properly put in perspective in terms of that, So the ancient is also indicating that the throne is very important for the unification of the people and the unification of the tribes, as even was indicated by the example of His Majesty. The ancient is actually has outlined a lot of things, and also that there are a lot of efforts being made by items from the University of the West Indies, who trying to find ways to see how it is that they can embrace indigenous traditional practices, but that they are disturbed in one way or the other by the Smithsonian establishment, who also have their own interest in terms of who they want to have enthroned and how they want to make use of the Ethiopian Crown Council. So yes, at this moment, I think I would have arrived at the comments, questions, and answer period, ancient. Yes, so we would like to give thanks for all the presentations which have been made, and the patience, of all ones and ones who were able to log in, and we even bear with those ones who may have had connectivity challenges. Yes, so I would like to acknowledge by show of hands, once and ones maybe who would like to make some comments, or who would like to pose questions to the speakers, different presentations which have been made. Yes, I. Yes, yeah, because perhaps let Aman also just have pose one. I've one question, maybe for each speaker. Then, in that sense, perhaps we can start with the first speaker, question for Papa Mudupi would be that Papa Mudupi, when one reads the book of the Elder Mochimo Plano, the Earth Most Strangest Man, the Rastafarian, you know, the ancient there makes a point that like there was no one who was able to open the seals, as I know Emperor Haile Selassie is the one who is recorded and acclaimed as having opened the 7 seals, which had sealed a book. The ancient Mochimo Plano says that only Emperor Haile Selassie was able to open the book, and the book is education. He says that Emperor Haile Selassie came to educate these illiterate millions. Are you able to comment on this in relation to the Revelation 5, verse 5, and the coronation of 1930, since the ancient has also indicated that the coronation of Haile Selassie was the fulfillment of biblical prophecy, and I know part of the biblical prophecy is Revelation 5, particularly that chapter that makes a reference to the Lion of Judah, who is the root of David. And then maybe to I can give the eye, maybe the eye can, or maybe I can just pose all the questions, and then after I pose all the questions, then each speaker will then respond to the question which was posed directly to them. Then this one I have for maybe Sister Kitami, since the sister was presenting on the coronation of the Empress. What does the sister think is the lesson to be drawn from the break with tradition and the coronation of the Emperor simultaneously with that of the Empress? Okay, to Papa Moabi, the question would be that given the fact that the repatriation program or the Back to Africa program of African people back to the continent was in the 20th century initiated by Regent Tafari Mabone in 1919 and in 1922 when he sent a communication to the UNIA Convention, and also in 1927 when he sent Dr. Wekine Martin. Would you think that the coronation of the Emperor Haile Selassie gave impetus to the repatriation program? And if so, how so? And I note that the eye has raised a hand. I will give the eye a platform, maybe to pose a question or make a comment immediately after I pose this last question to Ancient Jabulani. Seeing that the Ethiopian royal family is trying to reach out to the Rastafari community, as we have seen recently, that the Prince Ermias did make a visit to Jamaica, and he has actually made repetitive visits to Jamaica and has met the Rastafari community. What does the ancient think is the strategic role of the Rastafari community in strengthening those relations with that royal family? And how could the Rastafari community then lobby for the recognition of the Crown Council in Ethiopia? Because the Rastafari community, I know from some sections or some parts of the continent, would have had some meetings with the embassy or maybe with the office of the Prime Minister. But how could either the Rastafari community or other organizations which are membered by members of the Rastafari community then lobby for the recognition and the acceptance and the return of the Ethiopian Crown Council back in Ethiopia? Yes, and then maybe before I can respond to these questions, I will give to Papa Moabi. Perhaps he also have a question or a comment directed to any of the speakers. Give thanks.
No, we give thanks, ancient Papatulo. I think let Eman humble. It wasn't necessarily a question, but it was just going to be a comment. So I think Ayman will engage when Ayman, respond to the question. Thank
Yes,
you,
I.
ancient.
Yes, I give thanks. Give thanks. I'm not sure if there's any other one who would also like to pose a question or make a comment. If not, then we would immediately grant the opportunity for the speakers to respond to the posed questions, starting with Papa Mudupi. Give thanks. Yes, I, Papa Mudupi. Did the eye hear Aman question to the eye? All right. It seems like Papa Mudupi maybe is having some challenges. Sister Kitami, can the sister maybe respond to the question that was posed to the eye about the lesson drawn? Papa Mudupi can come maybe a bit later. Sorry.
Let me try my very best. I think it shows that even when one gender is discarded below the other, in this case, an empress by human perceptions and worldly standards, the Most High maintaining the balance celestially will exalt the abased. Christ exalted the Ethiopian queen, saying, "She will rise up in judgment because she heeded the commandments of the Ark of the Covenant." Hence, her son brought it to Ethiopia. The faith of Christ came to Ethiopia during the reign of Queen Kendake in the era of the apostles. So women share in the glory of the men. Men and women are one. See.
Sit, now we give thanks, Sit, yes, I know. Well, that's very true, the teaching there that even the scriptures does declare that it's the Most High who make them one, and who the Most High make one, no one must put asunder. So, and even as I have learned that the emperor did indicate that the empress should share in his glory, So there's no limit to what the glory of the Emperor Haile Selassie is, in which he declared himself that the empress would share in that. So yes, we give thanks and praises for that response. Say yes, Papa Papa Moabi, maybe we can give to the eye, since Papa Mudupi maybe is still having challenges. Thanks.
We give thanks, ancient, for the question. Yes, ancient, it did give it some impetus. And I did ask if that's the case, then how so? Like for one, as indicated before coronation, there was already a greater awareness of Ethiopia by African people. And not only people of African descent, but by also other royal houses. And I think ancient Jabuliani has just spoken to that most of these royal houses, they do trace their lineage back to Ethiopia. Like the British monarchy, for example, they trace their descent to King David through Farael. Farael is one of the sons of King David. According to the King James Version, King David had 67 sons. But of course, King Solomon, then it's recorded that he had quite a very few number. So during the war itself, there are even Americans who had enlisted and wanted to and assisted and went to fight on the side of Ethiopia. That was after the coronation, and some of them they remained after the war to help with rebuilding of the country after the war. And later on, with the visit to Trinidad, Tobago, and Jamaica, and what was also said by the Ethiopian emperor, and the granting of the land in Ethiopia, Shashaman, to Africans, as the ancient put it, in the living spora. The impetus was there. If I may also to contribute on the coronation, the significance, particularly on the issue of the significance for women. I might also look at in terms of when you look at the position of women in 1930 and subsequent to now, and some of the challenges, because it has always been said that our societies or African societies, and often when it's been said in a negative way, that are too patriarchal. So the break with the tradition also dismantled that whole notion of a very patriarchal society. And it is worth looking into in terms of the emancipation of women. You know, the comment that I wanted to make is on the presentation of the ancient Elder Jabulan. I think it is very, very important. And I would agree with the ancient that to establish relations with the royal houses, it's very important. Because the unity of Africans, it's exactly that unity of all Africans across. And it's also within that unification that where certain misunderstandings have been developed can be corrected. And looking at it in the context of the continent and the future of the continent, the role of the kings will have to be revisited. It's inevitable. Already in South Africa, you've got the constitutional framework that has established the National House of Traditional Leaders. It's an institution that is there. In other African countries, that model might not be there. In Tanzania, for example, they were abolished. So I don't know what's the current status. Because when you speak of the Ethiopian, literally even using the words of the sense, like the way the West uses the word or the meaning or the understanding of an empire, is that you have a number of kingdoms there. That would be. So I understand also in the presentation of the ancient that these are royal houses that also trace, because there's a lot of destruction that has been done over the years. But the ones that are still able to trace their descent back there, they understand it as such, that is the greater house. And there are institutions, for example, that also can assist. For example, NRC is a recognized community council within the CRL. And the CRL Commission is there for the promotion and protection of cultural, religious, and linguistic communities. So, and in terms of culture and language, the custodians are themselves the kings, the royal houses. So they've also been participating in activities. They continue to participate in activities of CRL. So I think from the NRC, there's already a constitutional framework within which to work towards establishing and strengthening those relations for the betterment of all Africans. With working relations with the Ethiopian Royal House, it's there, it's constitutionalized. Working with the UN, it's constitutionalized. With the AU, with the South African government, it's there. In the Constitution, there's a provision to that effect. So, and one other, on the economic side, the numbers that the ancient had spoken to, it's a great resource for the continent, even when we think in terms of the Africa free continental trade area agreement with the African diaspora being the 6th region has been recognized, because the AU recognized the African diaspora as the 6th region, when already it was said some years back when Her Majesty said that even from the formation of the OAU, there's always been an intention to include Africans living outside of the continent as part of the establishment. So when the AU established the 6th region, it is already a fulfillment of that desire that was expressed. So, in terms of what the ancient had spoken about, the Smithsonian, controlling the royal house or certain members of the royal house, I think generally that's the challenges that mankind is faced with. You know, there's just some other irate there that's just hell bent on causing havoc throughout all. Because in 1963, the world was told that Armageddon has passed. That we must become members of a new race. And issues of racism, supremacy of one race over the other, bigotry, prejudice, all that were addressed when the emperor went to register the charter of the OAU. So in South Africa, I think things can be done. In conclusion, ancient, I think from NRC side, things can be done already. A lot of work has been suspended on the basis of the resources to establish links with the royal houses, because some of the royal houses, there are already structures that where they are organized into, like Contralesa and so on, and their parliament or the House of National House of Traditional Leaders. So that's what can already be done. That's within the context here, using this vehicle. We give thanks, ancient. Amana would have loved to say quite a few, but due to constraints of time, I would like to humble here and give access unto the ancients, mostly Rastafari.
Yes, yes, ancient. No, we give thanks, ancient, for that response. Yes, and to touch briefly also on the reflections that were made by ancient Jabulani, and also to indicate the prospects, of effort on the part of NRC, in strengthening the works that the ancient suggested should advance. I'm not sure. It's like now we're less than a minute. Papa Mudubi, is the eye there able to hear I now? Or maybe the eye, still not there. Papa Jabulan, I see that we are less than a minute. I don't know, ancient, maybe the I can then maybe attempt to respond, but it's gonna cut, Then you can continue also on the last maybe interval. Yes, sir.
I give thanks. Blessed. Yes, sir. Yes, I give thanks for the comment and the support to the presentation. Yet
Selassie, blessed ancient. The ancient can forward still. Give thanks.
Yes, sir. In response to the request, the question, then, when we look at the visitation of Prince Ermias to Jamaica, the few times he's been going in and out, and again, in terms of the Crown Council, moving him, the Smithsonian's actually moving him around America, Europe, and even on the continent, wanting to make sure that they have control and recognize him, Ermias, as the one to be the one to be installed as king once the throne has been reestablished in their mind. Now with the going to Jamaica being highlighted as the place of the rise of Rastafari, the rise of the consciousness of His Majesty and Her Majesty, the rise of the consciousness that we have a God and King, which is not that of the Europeans, right? They want to, because you see, there is a certain strength that Jamaica is still giving towards Africa and throughout the living spora, where Rastafari recognize and accept the royal house of Ethiopia as the head, with His Imperial Majesty as the head, right? Now, a lot of the visitation also is because the Smithsonian's sponsors the University of West Indies. Through that sponsorship, again, there's the faculty of Rastafari. You will find that they will always be in that position to invite His Majesty Prince Amias for certain occasion. Yes, I was there in 2016 when the 50th anniversary of when His Majesty made the trod to Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados, and America. What took place then was gathering of all Rastafari. Now, when His Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie I trod to Jamaica, the overwhelming factor that the Rastafari community had on even the Jamaican government, security and police could not contain the numbers of Rasta that was there to welcome His Majesty at the airport. Now, this was after enough massacre, which we talk of Carl Gardens. When Bustamante now even put the death sentence and warrant on the heads of all Rastaman, said bringing Rastaman dead or alive. All these things, again, when even the the UN heads of states and so forth were trying to persuade His Majesty not to come to Jamaica. He still made his way there. And the greatest part of his speech to I was that Jamaicans and Ethiopians are blood brothers. So therefore now, the keeping that strength and knowing that where it comes to now, the control of Ethiopia politically, this is in my mind where it comes where the Smithsonians are part of the actual archiving and maintaining control of I history. So they can also rewrite and control what the narrative that should be coming out of I through media and so forth, right? They would be making sure they have full control of who we would then revere to be the head of Rastafari if we're looking strongly within the royal house in the existence for I to see and behold. Right? So this is where I'm saying now, the strengthening of the Rastafari community, enhancing and coming together with the royal houses, especially here on the continent, within the respective countries, ones and ones realizing their lineage through their own tribes and clans, seeing that now reality will find that ones have direct link to the royal house of Ethiopia. Linking all that together, yes, eventually we can then realize the full emancipation and unification of all African on the continent, which will then strengthen I of the living spora to know that we are all one African people. This is going to be still, I think, where we're going to be having a lot of infiltration, a lot of ways that they will try to elude us, disillusion, put us into a lot of disarray amongst ourselves, so that we never have that strength of unification or even Ubuntu-ness. I give thanks.
Since yes, I ancient, yes, I ancient. I will give thanks, ancient, for those comments and such response, and just to make more emphasis, yes, I still on the strategies and the need to unify, because the ancient there, Papa Moabi did make mention of a particular platform which already exists in the context of, like here in South Africa, like Contra Lesa, one institution that can also be made use of by NI communities here to try and see how NI can achieve more recognition and stronger unity, as the community in the South. And then I know as the ancient is also making reference to the African dimension, of NI traditional and indigenous communities. There's also the African Kingdoms Federation that I've come to learn that it exists, and it's like federation of different kingdoms in the continent, also including some of the royal families which are currently living in the diaspora there. And I think one of the representative of this African Kingdoms Federation was interviewed some time back by the South African news media house like the SABC News. So I think we can also try to look into those possibilities and vehicles, and also try to see what influence, because what the Smithsonian Institute to appreciation is that it is basically occupying a space. It is occupying a space of influence where INI community does not find itself to be occupying that space, to be making those influences. So there's deficiency on INI part as a community, as the agent indicated that there's not been that proximity between the Rastafari community and now other people are taking advantage, and trying to position themselves like that. So I think there should be more influence being exerted, on the part of the INI community, in terms of also trying to reach out to the throne, and also trying to capacitate ourselves in terms of what the Smithsonian also are doing in terms of controlling our own narrative, controlling the research work, research material, which is one of the elementary works also that New Race Consciousness has committed to do, is just issues of resources, as we are witnessing that the Smithsonian is also able to be flexible because it has amassed, quite a lot of resources around itself. So it's issues of resources that can also enable. But our determination to unite and reach out to INI people to more strengthen our indifferences to INI traditional communities, that would also have to be effectively dealt with, as I learned from the ancient presentation and response and the Baba Mwabi's presentation. So yes, elders, no, we give thanks for the words, for the sounds, and for the power, for everything which the Most High was able to bless INI with tonight. I see many of INI participants have also logged out. I think it's issues of network and sometimes maybe issues of being worn out. Some of the eyes may be going to work tomorrow, so others maybe need to get a little rest, So perhaps that's some of the reasons why others did not come back. But nevertheless, we would have had all the scheduled presenters having made their presentations, and we tried our level best to engage, with each speaker. And then we've also made recordings of the presentations. And so I think the recordings are just going to be edited, and then after being edited, they're going to be made user-friendly for purposes of them being shared publicly. So INI will be let know in terms of how to get access to these proceedings. So in this time, I would like to give to Sister Kitami, maybe to just give a vote of thanks on behalf of Ras Butokwa, who was not able to join INI due to unforeseeable circumstances. Yes, I give thanks. Sister Kitami.
Greetings once more. On behalf of New Race Consciousness, I wish to give thanks to Emperor Haile Selassie I and Empress Waizero Menen for making this lecture presentation a reality. Give thanks to Elder Jabulani, who was generous to form part of the panel throughout demanding schedule and short notice. Give thanks to Ras Mutwina for the introduction of New Race Consciousness. Give thanks to Baba Muwabi for the presentation on the political significance of the coronation. We give thanks to Ras Murupi for a well-constructed and insightful presentation. Give thanks to Sister Kitami. We are grateful to Ras Ainiti for facilitating this interesting program. Give thanks to those who were with INI in thoughts. As Ras INDT has already mentioned, a recording will be edited and shared. Give thanks.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I give thanks, Sister Kitami. Give thanks, Rastafari. Yes, sir. Any closing remarks there, Papa Muali?
We give thanks, ancient, unto the Most High Emperor Haile Selassie and Empress Menenai. We give thanks. I think ancient will humble with the vote of thanks that has been done by Empress Kitami. Most High.
Rastafari. Give thanks, Ancient. Ancient Jabulani.
I give thanks for the new race consciousness, for all the presenters, their presentations. Yes, Empress Kitame. Yes, I give thanks for the vote of thanks. And as Ainity, yes, as facilitator, my historian, yes. And it seems that we have many ones amongst us as been presented as true historians. And I pray that the new race consciousness can be the media and platform that can bring more awakening and knowledge to I and I as Rastafari and our people, especially those of the indigenous knowledge institutes, those of our traditional community, indigenous traditional community, because it is that foundation that can bring I and I more stronger together as a people on a whole. Once ones truly have knowledge, wise mind, and understanding of our past and the way forward in our future. So we give thanks and pray for more strength and pray that ones will continue with the works. Blessed love.
Blessed love. Give thanks, Ancient. Give thanks to everyone. Give thanks to the Most High Rastafari and Menen. Give thanks for the strength team, which is good. And I hope that and I have a wonderful night until I have another session, through the powers of the Most High. We give thanks and praises. Most strength elders, Rastafari.
Most High.